Welcome back to this Open and Relational Theology Conference, a conference that's exploring the social and political implications of open and relational thinking. We just heard a fantastic lecture and response and had some good discussion. And we're now moving to Gregory Boyd's presentation. Greg, I have as your lecture title, A Call for a United Faith Response to Our Current Climate Crisis. Greg, could you give the folks a sentence or two introduction to let them know who you are as you begin your lecture?
Yeah, my name is Greg Boyd, and I am the senior pastor of Woodland Hills Church in Maplewood, Minnesota. I'm an adjunct professor at Northern Seminary in Chicago. And there you go. And up until 7 months ago, I didn't know anything about climate change, but now I'm going to be giving a lecture on it. So there you go. So here's the thing. I was challenged back last April by someone in my congregation who was wondering why I have not spoken out about climate change from the pulpit. And I thought that was a weird thing for a pastor to speak about. I knew about climate, global warming and stuff, and I knew it was important, but I never had really looked into it that much. And he says, well, why don't you look into it? And then maybe you'll change your opinion. So I did. He says, look into the science behind it and it will blow your mind. And it did blow my mind. It was, frankly, the most sobering experience of my entire life. Here's a just a snippet of what I learned. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg is melting. But I didn't know that the Arctic is warming about 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. A recent study came out from Finland that shows that the southwest region of the Arctic is actually warming 7 times faster than the rest of the planet due to methane gas being released because of the melting permafrost, which is really bad news because methane is about 85 times more potent at trapping heat than is CO2. Right now, we've lost about 2/3 of the ice mass of the Arctic in the last 40 years. And the real bad news is that because it's mainly melting from the bottom up, from the ocean waters warming, we've lost 95% of the ancient ice of the Arctic. And the ancient ice is the ice that has been around for 100,000 years. And that it's in contrast to the seasonal ice, which comes and goes. This ice stays year round. But we're down to only 5% of the Arctic right now has ancient ice, which means that the ancient ice is much more stable than the seasonal ice. And so the remaining seasonal ice is, in all probability, going to be melting pretty fast. And it's already, the whole thing's been melting pretty fast. We don't know when will be the first, what they call a blue ocean event, when we have a ice-free or virtually ice-free Arctic. It was only 15 years ago or so that they were saying that we could have a blue ocean event by 2100. They're now saying that we could have a blue ocean event virtually at any time, certainly by 2030. And that's real bad news because once the ice is completely gone, it will freeze over again during the winter, but it will set in process an escalation of the temps. It's already warming much faster than the rest of the globe. It's going to get worse once that ice is gone because of what's called latent heat. It takes a lot of energy to melt ice into water. And so as long as there's ice there, it absorbs most of the heat. But once the ice is gone, the water has to do all the work. And so the temp goes up exponentially faster. And this sets in motion all these feedback loops, self-amplifying feedback loops. For example, because of this albedo effect, the snow-covered ice will reflect the radiation of the sun back out into the atmosphere, at least a good percentage of it. Light surfaces do that, but dark surfaces like the ocean absorb that. So as long as you have a lot of ice covering, snow covering, well, you've got a lot of albedo going on. The lots being refracted. But the less ice you have, or less snow-covered ice you have, well, then the more the ocean has to absorb the heat, and the more the ocean has to absorb the heat, the faster the ice melts. The faster the ice melts, the more the ocean has to absorb the heat, and that's that feedback loop. And there's a number of things like that. And the concern is that there's a tipping point where once you go beyond that, there's no reversing this. And some scientists, climatologists argue that we've already crossed some of those tipping points, or at least we may have crossed some of those tipping points. Very concerning. It's the warming of the Arctic has now It's causing the jet stream to wobble. It's not holding it together like it used to. And so what we're finding is that cooler air from the north is getting farther south than ever before, and warmer air from the south is getting north more than ever before. And it's creating these extreme weather events. And the climatologists across the board agree that these weather events are only going to get more intense droughts, more intense rain. They'll get more intense and more frequently as we go into the future, the foreseeable future. Things will get worse and worse at a faster and faster rate into the foreseeable future. So more and more climatologists are saying out loud, including the head of the IPCC, that this is an existential threat. In fact, some politicians are now agreeing that this is an existential threat. It's a threat to humanity, and not in the far distant future. It's a threat to humanity mainly because, well, some have argued that we're at least in the beginning stages of the sixth mass extinction. 5 times before in Earth's history, there's been mass extinctions, which is defined by losing 75% or more of the Earth's population of whatever species are on the Earth at the time. So this is the 6th one. And currently we're losing 150 to 200 species a day. That just blew me away. We've lost about 90% of the large fish in the ocean. This one report I read said that by the year 2047, there won't be any more edible fish in the ocean at our current rate. And that's not just because of global warming, it's partly because of our overfishing. Our fishing practices are just ridiculous, cruel to the ocean life and marine life. So it's all very concerning. All this is going to create, just havoc that we have to be prepared for. Immigration is going to be a huge concern. It already is in places like the Horn of Africa, where lands are becoming literally uninhabitable. And so folks have to migrate. Where are they going to go? Where are the folks in Bangladesh going to go when sea levels rise just another 2 feet? Or in fact, I think it's a little less than that. We are already in a world we're seeing xenophobia on the rise, and nations are closing their borders to immigrants already. And now we're going to be facing, I think, an unprecedented immigration crisis, refugee crisis here in the near future. The most depressing fact for me, as I studied this the last 7 months, has been just the history of our responses to the climatologists who've been telling us this. The last 30 years, well, actually more than 30 years, we've been being warned about this. It's been very clear about the correlation between CO2, trapping heat, the global warming, and that this is going to have disastrous effects. And so that's why the IPCC was formed in 1988. But since then, the IPCC is formed to provide guidelines to all the nations about the thresholds that we must stay beneath. And 1.5 was always kind of the go-to. We have to keep it below 1.5 degrees of warming above pre-industrial standards. We're already about 1.1, 1.2. And it was only 20 years ago they were saying we have to avoid 1.5 by the year 2000, by 2100. And then it was moved up 10 years later to we have to avoid 1.5 by the year 2050. Now they're saying we're on pace to hit 1.5 by 2030. And there are some who say that we might hit it as early as 2027. And in this time, with all this warning, greenhouse gas emissions have only increased. It's increased 65% since we founded the IPCC. The response has just been pathetic. We have these annual conferences. We just got done with COP27. And a lot of good pledges are made and promises are made, like they were made with the Paris Agreement, like they were made before that, previous sessions, pledges to reduce gas emissions by such and such amount by such and such a date, and promises of developing countries to provide assistance to or first world countries to provide assistance to developing countries, because the first world countries are the ones who are producing the most greenhouse gas emissions, and the developing countries are the ones who are producing the least, but they're suffering the most because of it. And so this is ecological justice. But and so new promises were made to provide aid. But in 2012, the first world countries had committed billions of dollars to helping these developing countries to fight climate change and to mitigate against it. And they promised that by 2020, but 2020 came and went, and they didn't see a dime. So the response has been really pathetic. No, there's some good news. There's a big push to turn to renewable energy sources, solar power, wind power, and those sorts of things. And those are making some progress. But still, with all the emphasis in the United States on turning to green energy, we still are 89% dependent on fossil fuels, which creates all the greenhouse gas emissions. There's some technological solutions.
Greg, you got 2 minutes left.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, so there's some problem. But I agree with those folks who argue that while there's technology stuff that has some promise that we can look to, what needs to change is the thinking that got us into this problem has got to be reversed. And the thinking that got us into this problem is that we have a perpetual growth economy built on a perpetual diminishing resource. And even apart from climate change, that spells disaster. Add on climate change, it spells disaster in the near future if it doesn't change. And we've had this apathy towards the earth and the animal kingdom. The thing is that, and so the hope that people like Richard Heinberg puts out is that as people increasingly see that this is an existential crisis, that they'll voluntarily adopt a degrowth lifestyle and move towards simplicity and minimalism and sustainability. And there are movements that are starting here. My thesis is just this, that we find in both Islam and in Christianity and in the Torah, a call, an understanding that God has created this world and loves this world, cherishes this world, and that human beings are, as it says in the Quran, we are the vice regents. We're his landlords. He's entrusted us with some of this responsibility. So it seems to me that we ought to be doing for faith reasons what others are doing for just survival reasons. This is what we should have been doing all along. And that we can lead this movement. What would it look like if Jews and Christians and Muslims came together with a united voice and spoke out against this, and then provided a demonstration of what it looks like to work together to create sustainable ways of living and have a more just, more relational relationship with the earth? And lastly, I'll say, so time doesn't cut me off here, that I believe that those of us who hold to an open relational understanding of God and reality should be at the forefront of this. Because while many of our fellow believers hold to a view of God that's timeless and is not affected by the world and is passable and determines everything, we've always held that God loves the world profoundly and God suffers with the world and for the world, is wrapped up with the being of the world. And we've always believed that we're meant to be God's partners, as already been said here. And we believe that the future is open and human beings have agency and our choices make a difference. And if ever there's a time where we need to cash in on that difference, that there's hope and we can change the future, it's now. But it's got to be now because our time is running out. There, I'll leave it with you, Tom.
It was powerful. Thank you so much, Greg. Aaron Langenfeld, give us a 1 or 2 sentence introduction as you respond to Greg.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the great paper and the lecture. So I'm happy that I received the paper beforehand, so I could prepare myself to the response. So right now I'm in Paderborn in Germany, and I hold the chair for fundamental theology. It's a Catholic school here, and since like 2 months, I'm also the head of the school, which is why I just had to switch from administrations to research again. So please be patient with my questions. So I have 2 steps. Just a very short summary of how I understood your argument in 5 steps, and then I have like 4 minor points on clarifications and questions concerning the interreligious aspects of your talk. So I understood your argument as following. First premise, obviously, climate change is an existential challenge to humanity. The second, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam respond to this premise in terms of a fundamental human responsibility for creation. Third, this responsibility is grounded in an open and relational theism. It rests in the assumption that God creates the world as a free counterpart with an open history. Fourth, faith communities thus offer a positive motivational resource for combating climate change as opposed to action motivated purely negatively by the threat of the same. And fifth, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have a special prophetic role to play for humanity in the fight against climate change. And this is a point I found very striking in your paper. In this mission, the credibility of the common faith in a God who wants to see his creation grow in freedom also proves itself. So the credibility proves itself by doing this. And I think this is a striking thought because I see it as a way to connect panentheistic thought, process thought with the idea of participation, like faith being a participation in God's work. So I was very grateful for that idea. So just a few comments on this reconstructed argument. First, I would be interested to know how you understand the concept of motivation in your paper. It is the motivation to act against climate change. Do you use it more in the sense of a general moral obligation or more as a desire of the believer to do good? In the first case, it would be debatable what the specifically religious moment of the obligation would be that you strongly emphasized. Insofar as the second case presupposes a pre-formation of the will, the question would be how faith could be a general resource. It is the resource also for people who are non-believers. Eventually, here we have a copy of the dilemma of grace and free will. So I would be interested how you would understand motivation there. So then a suggestion would, in some way, the concept of wisdom be a philosophical term that could correspond to your concern. Like wisdom, in my understanding, expresses that the capacity of the subject to practically contextualize mere knowledge. Thus, the wise person knows not only that something is the case, but also how to deal with it. Could this be a concept to sum up the contribution of religions to the fight against climate change? Not only knowing that something needs to be done, but also having an understanding of actively doing it out of faith, hope, and love as principles of how to deal with the flaws of creation in general. As a Christian theologian, I'm interested in the extent to which the life and death of Christ plays a role in your approach. It is not only the responsibility for the preservation of creation that is part of Christian tradition, but also the belief that man in sin constantly fails in this responsibility. In my perception, this is the root of the faith in the incarnation, that the loving God who seeks relationship has shown the world in Christ that it does not have to worry about itself first and last, but that the essential has already happened and is running towards its completion. So in my experience, Jewish and Muslim concepts of moral responsibility for creation rarely subscribe to this soteriological perspective and tend to accuse the Christian side of ignoring the position of human beings in the cosmos or to relativize man's obligations to act too strongly from the idea of redemption. So there would be my final question, how you would react to that. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron. We're now going to move to general discussion. We're going to allow Greg a chance to respond to some of Aaron's great questions. But as he's doing that, type in your questions in the chat box there. And when he's completed his response to Aaron, we'll go to those. Greg?
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. That was an excellent summary. You presented it so succinctly, probably the way that Tom wishes I would have done it. But it was very, very, very well summarized. Regarding the motivation question, I'm not quite sure I understood what the question was, but I'll take a stab. It seems to me that most folks who are activists in climate change issue, environment, are doing it for pragmatic reasons. We do this or we die, which is a valid motivation. But and I think that's valid for believers too. But we're not only motivated by pragmatics. It's part of our faith that God has put us in charge of this. And so this is, I think, what we ought to have been doing all along. And so in some ways, I think this crisis is a challenge for us to start living more consistently with our faith and living it out. That's not in competition, I don't think, with pragmatic considerations, but it gives us one advantage, and that is that it's easy to fall into hopelessness when you start really looking at the dire situation that we're in. But faith is what spurs me on. because we do it whether we think we can individually save the world or not. Regarding your second question, wisdom, that's an area really that could be explored. The whole idea of applied knowledge, knowing how things work, understanding. And here's where I think the open relational perspective is so important, because much of the damage that we've done to the earth has been because we have had a completely non-relational understanding, a relationship with the earth. We've just exploited it without the idea that, we're to enjoy it, but we also have to give back. And so caring for the earth and the animal kingdoms has to be one of our highest priorities. It's not our highest because it's an existential thing that we're talking about. There's a lot that could be done on that, even with, I think, bringing in other faith traditions. Eastern traditions give a lot of insight. Indigenous people have got a lot to teach us about our proper relationship with the earth. And the final thing about how does the life, death, and Christ fit in with all this? On that one, I'm still in process. I haven't integrated this all together yet. It is, my concern has been this, that there is an eschatological understanding that we have in the Christian tradition about, God's victory that was won in Christ, and he'll sum up all things, and there's this final judgment, and all of that. And we may be coming towards that. I don't know, but my biggest worry is that, as has happened very frequently, eschatology becomes an excuse for inaction. Oh, God will take care of it. Everything all works out in the end. And as a Christian pastor, I deal with that all the time. Oh, God will make it better. Well, no, you know what? God would never let this happen to us. Well, look at the reality. He seems like he is letting us do this. How much rope has he given us to hang ourselves with? It's how much freedom do we have? Do we have the freedom to destroy the earth? All indications are that we do. And that's what I have to work with. And so I worry about any kind of escapist eschatology.
That's excellent, Greg. John Sanders in the chat box asked a question about language and metaphors, and worries that maybe the phrase climate change is kind of neutral. It doesn't really motivate people, but we need something that's more aggressive. Climate burning, planet burning, baking. What do you think about that?
We're on the precipice of hell. No, I say climate change. It should be a climate crisis, if not climate catastrophe, which is already starting. When you're in privileged countries, it's done some like catastrophe. It happens someplace else. But if you're in the Horn of Africa right now, it's a climate catastrophe. Global warming. The trouble with that is people, at least that I have to deal with. They'll point out, hey, well, last year was cooler than the year before. And they think it's going to be a linear progress this way. Whereas in fact, it's all over. It's global. It's climate weirding, as one person put it. It's just going to be weird. It's going to be strange. It's going to be destructive. But overall, it's getting warmer and warmer. And that's a good point. Climate change, it's like, what's the big deal with that? Changes from summer to fall to winter all the time here in Minnesota. It doesn't hurt anybody. The climate catastrophe would be better.
Excellent. Another question before we go to the chat. I have a proposal for you.
Brilliant.
I've been reading your Crucifixion of the Warrior God the last couple of weeks because I'm writing this book against omnipotence, or rethinking omnipotence, and I wonder, Aaron asked about where does Jesus fit in this? What do you think about, in addition to the crucifixion of the warrior God, the crucifixion of an interventionist God? In other words, crucifixion of the idea that God's going to intervene, as you put it, and eschatologically fix things single-handedly. Well, what do you think about that possibility?
I would have to chew on that. As usual, you're one step to the left of me.
Left?
Yeah, you're always a little more radical than me. I don't know. But my worry would be that if you crucify the interventionist God, that could easily lead to a sort of deistic view of God. Oh, well, then God's not going to. Whereas I think God intervenes, but it's a question is, how does he intervene? Like, I think Jared was saying about how God uses humans as his instruments. God's in the world. God's always active. He is intervening. He's influencing things. He's just not. Maybe what we want is the crucifixion of the coercively intervening.
Yeah. Okay.
The influential intervening God, I want to affirm all over the place.
Right. Yeah. So do I. Yeah. Good. All right. Question here from Jared. Will Abrahamic traditions need to rethink their ideas of God transcendence to take these climate issues seriously? Is God as the ultimate reality and the highest goodness always seen as somehow distant or disconnected? Then will our theology just frustrate these attempts to care more deeply? In other words, there's a God out there. Is that really part of our theological problem too?
Yeah. Well, my first response is I love what Jay McDaniel said about, the Neoplatonist he was talking about, and he's not going to argue with them. Somehow this person works it out in a loving way. You want to affirm that. And I've been in many situations where I disagree profoundly with someone's theology, and yet somehow it gets translated into their loving action. And I can't get it in my head, but I'm just glad they're doing it and go out and learn from them. But I do think ideas do have implications, and all other things being equal, if you have a view that God is not, is not passionately involved in this planet, is the God's timeless and all the rest, it translates to, well, then there's nothing to worry about. God's got it all control. If God's predestined everything, well, then it's all part of God's plan. And those ideas can be very, very destructive, which is why I think open and relational theologians, we're in the best position to integrate a theology into our climate activism, and then invite others who are along for that ride. Our brothers and sisters who maybe have different theology, but they still care about the planet.
Excellent. You kind of answered Greg's comment or question in the chat box, which is basically how do we motivate Protestants, especially evangelicals, to take climate change seriously, or climate burning, to use John Sanders' word? How can this open relational thinking transform the thinking of those who deny climate issues?
Yes, you're asking a question that I'm a Christian pastor that's broadly in the evangelical tradition. And this is the one that wants me to put a gun to my head, because I have spoken out about climate change and the call for us to be good stewards of the earth, and it's become a part of my preaching now, thanks to that friend who opened my eyes to this. And I get pushback from people who are, this is part of what this is the area where I have to fight hopelessness the most, is that I have people who push back on me as having given into a liberal agenda because I'm holding to this climate stuff. And I ask, I try to have a dialogue with them, and I show them my charts. I give them from the IPCC report. I just put it all out there. They dismiss it all because they found this source on the internet that is blah, 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 and the planet's actually cooling and polar bears are thriving. And they live in this world of fake reality, but they're trapped in it, and they have a built-in resistance to any suggestion otherwise. I don't know what to do about that. I despair on that. And so I guess I have to punt on that question. I wish I had an answer to that. I lovingly just try to bring them along as much as possible. But this is where I hit, either they're siloed in their echo chamber on the internet and the categories are hardened, or they have an escapist theology that says, God's sovereign, don't worry about it, it's all under control. And that's where I start to despair.
Yeah. Aaron, you want to weigh in on these issues? We haven't heard from you for a little bit. Thoughts?
So I was just listening, and from a Roman Catholic perspective. So one striking thing about the question how to deal with this soteriological, eschatological issue is still on the agenda in Germany a lot because of our philosophical tradition. We struggle with the question of divine intervention and human free will to work especially on this problem, to say we are not dispensed from doing good because God will do it. In other terms, you have to do it because God is doing it through you without taking you away from this thing. And I'm or out of the game. And so what I'm really thinking is that addressing this matter in a theological sense, you also would have to serve a concept. How do you relate divine intervention and human free will? So maybe it is not enough to say God loves the world, he wants the best for the world, he wants to see it flourish, but also to have an explanation on how you see divine action by people doing something by their own means. And this is a huge debate going on in Germany still today as one of the major problems of secularism here, that we don't have any very good theory to explain how autonomy and divine intervention work all together. So I think this is seems like a side issue, but in fact, it goes to the core of the questions. How can we motivate people not to dispense their responsibility when it comes to eschatological questions?
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. I think part of what Greg is saying, that open and relational thought actually has some resources there. Open and relational thinkers have been thinking about that divine human synergy and what's going on. So thank you. A couple of the questions from Patty and Jay have asked us, what might the Islamic tradition provide in terms of hope and thinking about climate change? And both of you, of course, you were one Roman Catholic, other Protestant. But I wonder, Jared Morningstar, can I put you on the hot seat again and have you weigh in on this? You can, off the top of your head, or maybe you've thought about this deeply, I don't know. Can you think of Islamic resources that help think about the hope and motivating people to take climate change, climate burning seriously?
Yeah, I think there's both theological and sort of more legal resources for some of these questions. What initially pops to my mind whenever I think about this is the insistence in the Quran that the creation is this place of signs of God. It is this theophanic world. God is revealed in his most beautiful divine names in the various creations in nature. So that gives a very sacred valence to the natural world that makes it this medium of communication between God and humanity in a very emotive way. But then, within the legal tradition, you have important ideas about not engaging in environmental destruction in warfare, for example, or the proper treatment of animals. So there's both these kind of more abstract theological resources and certainly very sort of concrete suggestions the tradition has made in the past.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Jared. And some folks are pasting in quotes from the Muhammad, the Quran, that are helpful, some beautiful scripture passages. I want to go back to Aaron, though, based on a comment, I think, I forgot who made it now. ML. Aaron, the Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical, powerful statement there. I have a theological question for you, Aaron. How do you think of the theological move in Laudato Si as a motivator for everyone, but especially Catholics, since you're speaking from a Catholic perspective? How do you see that the theology motivates people to care for the earth?
That's a really good question, since my impression is that most of the people engaged in climate change, also Roman Catholics, are not really into theological reasoning for that. So, and one of the major issues Roman Catholic theologians have with Pope Francis is that he is not into like a very specific theological tradition that seems to be a good reasoning for many Roman Catholics. So, I would have to think about that more, but my impression is that that climate change has to be fought is very common sense among Roman Catholics in Germany, at least, but it's not very connected to theological reasons. It's more like this was the question, the motivational question. If it's understood in your concept, Greg, as like a general moral obligation, and this seems to be the case in Germany, or if you see something specifically religious in it, and you gave an answer to that. But I would say most of the Catholic people here would be, well, it's a tough question, but I would say they're more driven by the threat than by theological reasons for that.
Yeah, I want to come to Greg with a question that's kind of popped up here, but
Can I respond to Aaron's?
Yeah.
I better understand his question now. And you have in the Torah the idea that human beings are made in the image of God, and part of the meaning of that, I would contend, is that we rule. We're like little versions of God rules the cosmos, but He puts us in charge of this planet, and we're to reflect God's character in the way that we care for this planet. God doesn't dominate us, exploit us, or whatever, and so we shouldn't be just dominating, exploiting the planet. Rather, God's relational, and here's where open relational theology comes in to play. But so we should reflect that loving, servant, humble character in the way that we steward the earth and the animal kingdom. And we do that because we're made in God's image, and that applies whether you're a believer or not. So there is a moral obligation, I think, just by virtue of being made in the image of God, to be caring for the earth and the animal kingdom.
That's good, Greg.
Can I just shortly respond to that?
Yeah, go for it, Aaron.
So I think this is also a good starting point for the question concerning Christology. If you start with the Pauline Adam-Christ typology, and to see Christ as the reinstitution of Adam in some way. So I think this could be a way to focus on the soteriological matter in Christian perspective, and to take on this Khalifa thought in Islam and in Christianity. So
Good.
That's very good. I just before we leave this topic, Aaron, and Laudato Si and Pope Francis, I don't want to get the Pope in trouble in any way, but sometimes he sounds like an open and relational thinker, and I know that. Let me go back to you.
Trouble.
Let me go back to you, Greg. Motivations. You mentioned, and this was kind of in your response to Aaron, you mentioned the motivation just to keep living, survival. You mentioned the motivation of, basically obeying God, I kind of thought. You're made in the image of God. You're supposed to act like God. But Jay earlier also mentioned a kind of purposeness or telos or value in the world. Are there additional motivations between just doing what God tells us to do and staying alive that you might also point to?
Oh, absolutely.
I thought so.
We talked about beauty before. I think Whitehead's right. Beauty is the ultimate ideal, and that is an end in and of itself. You look at the beauty of the world and that we're destroying, and it's intrinsically wrong, because beauty should be there for life. There's an intrinsic value there, a goodness there that ought to bring us on. What I mean when I say that, I talk about the faith motivation versus the sheer pragmatic motivation, is part of what I'm getting at there is that I have found in the last 7 months, since I've really been trying to teach this to people, that one of the major objections is, what difference can I make? Okay, so I'm going to recycle, reuse, reduce, but as long as the corporations are doing it, then, it's just going to go on. And that's where I come back saying, look, it's always the right time to do the right thing. And you've got faith reasons for doing this, aesthetic reasons for doing this. So don't be thinking pragmatically on that one. That's where I think the faith and values things kicks in the best.
Yeah, sometimes deontological ethics are actually where we need to turn. Charles has a question, and I'll ask this to both Aaron and you, Greg, and it has to do with a quote from C.S. Lewis when he talks about, when he loses a friend dies, then he loses something greater than that. And if I understand Charles' question correctly, he's asking, when part of creation dies, when these species go extinct that you mentioned, Greg, is in some sense God dying? Does God lose something? How would you think about that, Greg, and then Aaron?
Well, Aaron, you want to go first? You kind of come up with an answer.
My impression reading the question was, but maybe I got it wrong. So would be more, I read it in an Anselmian way, like not the God dies, but maybe more mankind is hurting the order of creation and is not able to reconstruct the conditions of being able to connect with God by the order he instated himself. So I think I could agree on that. So that would be a great opportunity also from the Christian perspective, which is sometimes perceived problematic in interreligious situations, to take very seriously what sinfulness means concerning the creation. And also this is part of a latter question coming to the anthropocentrism problem, I guess. So if in my reading of Genesis 1, it wouldn't be anthropocentric, but exactly a relational thought of initiating man as responsible for the creation. So having a function for the order created by God. And I think you could relate on that by destroying creation. You're not just destroying something, but a whole cosmology in some way.
Beautiful.
And
excellent.
you have, at the very least, I would say that you find in the Hebrew Bible this several times God says, I don't want to judge Nineveh because there's so many animals there. God grieves over the destruction of animals. In fact, it's Habakkuk, I think it's 2:17, where he says to the king of I think it's king of Assyria, that your violence towards animals will terrorize you. Like the violence that you committed towards the judgment is that it will come back on you. And in some respects, I think that we're seeing that our violence towards the earth and the animal kingdom is coming back on us. I initially was going to do a paper on the what is to be under the judgment of God, and then talk about how in the biblical tradition they announce judgments not because they're saying you're doomed, but they're calling you to repent. And so this is a call for us to repent. To turn from the way we've been thinking about things that's brought about this destruction in turn. But I decided that gets too dicey because then I have to get into eschatology and all the rest. As you can see, I haven't worked out all the details on eschatology, but certainly it breaks God's heart. It's more than just the loss of animals. It's breaking God's heart and violating his order, as Aaron said.
Sherry Kling is asking a question that kind of moves us back toward some of the panentheistic concerns that have been mentioned. And she says, so well, maybe we keep talking about the earth as that object out there. Maybe we should think about the earth as us. Yes. And in some sense, not have this strong distinction. Yes. Maybe God's body is going too far for you too, but somehow there's not such a strong distinction between us and them. You're saying that. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I've come to think about if you think about the environment is like a second layer of skin. This skin protects us from, all the things in our environment that could get in, kill us. But we have a second layer of skin that is there to protect us from the harshness of the cosmos. And it's the atmosphere. It's the entire. And so the only thing is that we all share this same skin. We're all in this together. And so we should have the same respect for the earth and the environment as we would have for our own bodies, because it's an extension of our own body. And then we could talk about in what ways is it also perhaps the body of God and in panentheistic thought. But yeah, this is us. In destroying the earth, we are committing suicide.
Yeah, beautiful. Aaron, comment on that?
Just very shortly. I totally agree. And also I see this perspective within is resolvable in a panentheistic framework. Also, just to play the advocatus diaboli, I would say that it's part of the human condition not to see yourself as in this extended body, but to also be distinguished from it. And this makes it so hard to not be able just to understand yourself as a part within it. So even though I understand from the target perspective, I would say by describing the goal, we are just also describing the problem.
Nicely put. This has been a really, really rich discussion. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you all who posted questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of the comments and questions in the chat box. One of them, I think it came from Jay McDaniel, asked about the role of Iqbal. And that's a perfect transition to our next lecturer,